is going to be helpful for you. This is the first of 3 how to write a literary analysis videos I'm going to do. Each one's going to be very short. We're just going to take one piece of the literary analysis puzzle and talk it through a little bit. First thing I want to talk about today is kind of give you some concepts, the way to think about a literary analysis paper, and then we'll go forward. If you look down below in the description, there's a link to kind of a set of notes for this these talks called Mrs. Shelton's Guide to Writing a Literary Analysis Paper. Really, this is kind of it's basically taking what you know about writing a 5-paragraph essay. We're going to review some of that and showing you how really a literary analysis paper can just be a derivation of that knowledge. How the structure you already know with a 5-paragraph essay can be used as a literary analysis paper. There's just a few tweaks you need to learn. So there are 5 key things that we want to talk about in literary analysis papers. The first thing is you have to begin with what you want to prove. That's called the thesis statement. It's the foundation for your literary analysis paper. The thesis is going to be introduced in the, anybody guess? Introduction. An introduction has a couple of tasks. So we're going to talk mostly about the introduction and the thesis in this first part. So that's the first thing. You need a thesis. You need to decide, what is it I'm trying to prove with my paper? What is it I'm trying to argue? Because a thesis is arguable. It has to be able to be proved or disproved, to be discussed, to be argued back and forth. It's a statement about what you have read that you're going to try to prove. Kind of like a prosecuting attorney presenting his argument. I'm going to prove so-and-so is guilty of. All right. I'm going to prove that Jane Eyre is a spiritual development novel through which our hero, Jane Eyre, goes on a Bildungsroman journey to find who she is spiritually, emotionally, and academically. Something like that, right? That's a thesis. I can prove that. I can argue it with text. All right. So thesis, introduction, and then each paragraph in that essay, so you've got your introduction, each paragraph in that essay is going to take a piece of that thesis and give a support to it. I'm going to prove this because of this. I'm going to prove this because of this. I'm going to prove this because of this. So you have at least 3 body paragraphs. It can certainly be more, 4 or 5. It doesn't have to be a 5-paragraph essay unless you're told so, right? It can be a 6-paragraph essay, a 7-paragraph essay. But I'd say you want at least 3 body paragraphs. Remember the old saying, right? For a 5-paragraph essay, the introduction, you tell them what you're going to tell them. Then in the body, you in detail explain what you're telling them. And then in conclusion, you tell them what you told them. Tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. That's an oversimplification, but it's not too far off. Readers need signs, like Navy signs, to wave a ship in, to direct them. You're arguing through a process, so you have to make sure your writing is clear and carefully laid out so they can follow your argument. As a writer, though, when you're writing this, it also helps you to follow the structure, right? To have an idea in mind of where you're going and to know the steps you're going to take to get there. Because it helps you write the paper. It makes it so much easier to write the paper when you know A, where you're going, and B, what your main points are going to be. So I'm going to show you some tricks about that in next time's video, okay? And then the conclusion is the 4th element, right? So we have the thesis, the introduction, the body made up of your body paragraphs, the conclusion, which is going to summarize your ideas and leave them with hopefully a bang, right? And then the 5th thing are conventions of writing literary analysis papers. We'll kind of study the conclusion and conventions about writing the paper in the 3rd part of this video. All right, so let's get started on the thesis statement first of all. We said the thesis statement is a carefully constructed declarative sentence, okay, that's going to tell your reader what point you're trying to make about the paper. I don't want you to get all excited though right now about trying to make it really finalized. I want to give yourself permission to rewrite your declarative sentence, to rewrite your thesis statement as you go. Does that make sense? All right. Without a solid thesis statement, the essay cannot be successful. So if you look in your notes that hopefully you've downloaded, you're going to see some example thesis statements that would make good thesis statements for a 3 or 4 page paper. The first one, the fate of the main characters in Julius Caesar illustrates the dangers of excessive pride. All right, cool. the fate of the main characters. And then if you wanted to, you could maybe for your 3 body paragraphs, take 3 of the characters and talk about how pride led to their downfall, right? That would be an easy one. Bronte's Jane Eyre uses the dual symbols of fire and ice to develop her theme of the warmth of family and a loving home versus the danger of loneliness and unrestrained passion. Okay, so fire and ice. And then for your 3 body paragraphs, perhaps you could take hearth scenes at Thornfield Hall, hearth scenes at what was the first one? Gateshead, right? How the hearth at Gateshead at her aunt's home was always cold and the fire is always burnt out. She's kept away from the cherry nursery fire. But, so you can, and then maybe the last one, Ferndean, the place where she and Rockefeller come together at the end. You could talk about how she's the bringer of the fire. She tends the fire at Ferndean, okay? So you could break that down into 3 paragraphs. You could break it down further. There are other places Jane lives. You could talk about her living by herself as a teacher. You could talk about, but you could just, each of those settings then becomes a body paragraph and you develop that, right? How about the third one example I have? The diction and actions of the Duke in Robert Browning's My Last Duchess reveals his materialism, his arrogance, and his jealousy. Ooh, materialism, arrogance, and jealousy. There's a paragraph in each of those and you're good to go. Let's back up for a minute and think about that Jane Eyre. What if I said, Bronte's Jane Eyre uses symbolism to portray her themes? Way too broad. You could write books on that because there's so much symbolism and there's so many themes. How could you ever come to the end of writing that? Okay. You want to make sure your thesis statement is narrow enough that you can develop it well within a 3 or 4 page paper if that's what you're assigned. And that's what I've been assigning you, even a 5-page paper. So to do that, you want something you can handle in 4, 5 body paragraphs tops. Okay, so you have to keep it narrow. You're looking at one theme, you're looking at one symbol, you're looking at a very narrow, limited thing. Now, in our assignments, in our Colloquium Magnum assignments, I have pretty much narrowed those for you already, so I think you won't have too much trouble with that. All right. Obviously, I think you remember from writing 5-paragraph essays, the most common place, the best place for a thesis statement to land is going to be at the end of that introduction, right? Because your introduction serves as a funnel. You start off very broad. Let's say you start off very broad with your introductory statement, right? And you're going to make sure you list the name of the work that you're looking at and the author and probably the publication date. So Samuel Clemens' The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was first published in 1883 and has not stopped and has been controversial ever since then, all right? So you want it to have some information. You want it to be an attention grabber. We'll talk about how to build an introduction in a minute, but so it's going to funnel down from there, from that very broad information. Here's what we're talking about. I'm going to give some other information, and then you're going to land at the end with your thesis statement. It will all pile up. All that information will pile up, and the very bottom thing that's supporting the whole paper, the foundation, is stated at the end of the introduction, and that is your thesis statement. I'm going to use my 2 blue Lego bricks here to represent my thesis statement. Okay, so it's like a funnel. An introduction is. A 4 or 5 page paper only has room for 4 or 5 well-supported paragraphs, so be careful, okay? A good introduction is going to have an intriguing attention grabber at the very beginning, right? The first line of that introduction, it's often called the hook, okay? You can use a quote, you can use a well-phrased question, you can use some amazing statistic or fact or something kind of shocking about the story, maybe a quote that somebody has. If I'm going to talk about Huckleberry Finn, perhaps I want to use Hemingway's quote, who said, "There has been only one American novel, and that is Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. All the rest are, simply answering it, right, and are less than that." The idea is to hook the reader's interest. Okay, you do want to give them some basic information about the work, the author, and then bring them down maybe some history. If you're going to talk about Huckleberry Finn, perhaps you want to talk about the fact that it has been banned for its extravagant use of language that is not considered acceptable, that was not Mark Twain's habit, so perhaps there must have been some sort of purpose behind that. Or your thesis is going to be, right? The Bildungsroman journey of Huck Finn along the Mississippi River is structured so that every stop builds upon the lessons that Huck is learning as he grows and discovers who he is as the man Huckleberry Finn. Okay, because we're talking about Huck Finn growing up and the lessons he's learning. And then what can you do? Then your paragraphs are going to be structured around those stops, right? Each stop will have a paragraph and you can expand on that. Probably 3 paragraphs is enough to get to 3 pages if that's all you're shooting for. If you want a 4 or 5 page paper, you're going to look at a little bit more in terms of paragraphs and perhaps 1 or 2 more lessons he learned, 1 or 2 more stops. All right. So when you're thinking about, let's take these apart for a second. I want you to think about, really, when you build something, you have to have blueprints, right? When you have a military attack, you have to have a plan. I want to encourage you to do an outline, but I don't want you to shy away from that and think I hate outlines. I want you to make this just a plan. That's all it is. A piece of paper and a pencil and a plan. At the top, I want you to write Roman numeral 1 and put introduction. And I want you to write just that first sentence we talked about. Samuel Clemens' Huckleberry Finn was first published in 1883. Something along those lines. And then I want you to leave a couple of lines blank, and then I want you to write TS: thesis statement. What's your thesis statement going to be? Write it there. Write it right now. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be your final one. It's a rough draft. Allow yourself to be not perfect right now, okay? It's so much easier to edit anything but a blank page, okay? You have to have something on paper in order to edit it. All right. There, that wasn't so hard, right? You have a thesis statement in place. Now, as you start to work on your essay, you may want to go back and change that thesis statement a little bit, to alter it, to include something else, give it a little slightly different spin. That's fine. Okay. What I want you to remember is thesis statement, opening, attention grabber. You're going to build between there with some interesting information, some background maybe historically. You can add in things that people might not know about Huck Finn or about the book. Maybe talk about it being banned. Okay. And then you lead into your thesis statement. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to tell you how long your introduction has to be. Everybody wants to know. How many sentences, Mrs. Shelton? Well, you need that attention-grabbing sentence where you give out some of the information, right? You need your thesis statement, which is going to be 1 sentence. There's 2 sentences. You're going to put in a couple of sentences of background information or history or something to funnel your readers down into that thesis statement, to bring them from the very broad, we're talking about Huckleberry Finn, to bring them down to, we're talking about Huck Finn growing up as he goes down the river, okay? In our case, for one of our colloquium magnos, all right? If I was doing Jane Eyre, I might say Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre was renowned for having the first modern female hero in a Bildungsroman novel, okay? And then I might take it down, give some information. Charlotte Bronte had grown up as a clergyman's daughter, and many of the experiences in Jane Eyre are very autobiographical. She uses the different houses that Jane teaches in as her Bildungsroman journey. Jane Eyre experiences a journey of development to fully knowing who she is emotionally and spiritually, as well as developing her faith relationship with God. And then my thesis statement might be something like, Jane Eyre's procession from house to house mirrors her spiritual journey of development, because maybe I would focus on that spiritual journey in my paper. Okay. And then that leads me in, I've got my 5 steps. I do just, Gateshead, and then the Clergyman's School for Girls, Thornfield Hall, Marsh Manor and Fern Dean, maybe, right, as my paragraphs. Okay, so your introduction is important. Why don't you start on that this week? Get your thesis statement and your introduction prepared for your ConMags, and you will be a good ways down. Tune in next time. Part 2, we're going to talk about how to build the paragraphs for your body of your literary analysis paper. I hope this is helpful. I'll see you next time. Bye.